What happens when one harmless joke destroys the only man who ever truly loved you? I thought teasing him in front of his best friend would make me look confident and funny. Instead, it broke something in him I didn't know could break. And the silence that followed was worse than any fight. It was supposed to be funny. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head. I wasn't trying to be cruel. It was just a joke, the kind of teasing couples do in front of friends. Or at least that's what I told myself. My name is Elara Wynn, and if I could take back one sentence, just one, it would be the one that made my husband sleep in the guest room and start treating me like a stranger. It happened at a dinner we hosted for his best friend, Mark. The night was warm, the table was full, and I'd had just enough wine to feel clever. Everyone was laughing about old memories. Mark and Daniel had known each other since high school. They told stories about football games, about camping trips, about how Daniel used to forget things when he got nervous. I wanted to join in, to keep the spotlight on me for a change. So when Mark joked about Daniel burning food on the grill, I leaned back, smiled, and said, "Well, your best friend knows what I like." The room went silent before I even realized what I'd said. Mark froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. Tessa, my co-worker, gave a short, awkward laugh that died almost immediately. Daniel just stared at me, not angry, not shocked, just hollow. I tried to save it by laughing harder, saying something like, "Relax, it's a joke." But no one laughed with me. Dinner carried on in small, broken pieces after that. Daniel said almost nothing. When everyone left, I expected a fight. I even rehearsed my lines, how he was being too sensitive, how he needed to learn to take a joke. But he didn't yell. He didn't ask for an explanation. He just walked upstairs, came back with a pillow and a blanket, and went into the guest room. No words, just the sound of the door clicking shut. I stood in the living room, still holding my half-empty wine glass, waiting for him to come back out. He didn't. The silence stretched through the walls. I told myself it was temporary. By morning, he'd calm down. I'd say sorry, and he'd forgive me, like always. Daniel was gentle. He never stayed angry. Except that morning, he wasn't angry. He was distant. He made his coffee, got dressed for work, and said, "I'll see you later." No kiss, no eye contact. It wasn't a punishment. It was something colder, something final. All day, I replayed the joke in my head, trying to twist it into something harmless. People tease their partners all the time, I told myself. It wasn't even true. It was just words. But every time I imagined Daniel's face, the way he'd gone quiet in front of everyone, I felt something ugly stir in me. Not guilt exactly, but fear. Because Daniel's silence didn't feel like hurt. It felt like realization. When he came home that night, he was polite. He asked if I'd eaten, if I'd gotten much done at work. I answered like nothing was wrong, pretending to match his calm. But inside, I could feel him slipping away. Not dramatically, not with anger. Just deliberately. Like he'd made a decision I wasn't aware of yet. That's when I started to panic. I tried flirting, joking again, apologizing without really meaning it. He just nodded and said, "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. The space between us kept growing, even though we were still in the same house. I told myself I'd fix it. I always did. I thought I could talk my way out of anything. But Daniel didn't want words anymore. He wanted proof. And by the time I realized that, he already had a plan. Not a loud one, not messy like my jokes. Quiet, careful, and perfectly legal. The kind of revenge only a calm man could create. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The night it happened started ordinary. Wine glasses clinking, music low, everyone in good spirits. I'd planned the dinner for weeks, wanting to show off our new place and prove I could host like someone who had her life together. Daniel's best friend Mark arrived first, cheerful as always, bringing a bottle of red. Tessa, my coworker, came a few minutes later, already chatting about office gossip. It was supposed to be fun, easy, safe. I remember how Daniel moved around the kitchen, quiet, focused, patient, while I filled the air with noise. I liked being the loud one. It made me feel in control. He was steady in that calm way that sometimes irritated me, like he was above all my nerves and jokes. I used to tell him he was too serious, and he'd just smile and say he liked that I was the opposite. Dinner went smoothly at first. We laughed about old college stories, shared memories, little things that made us feel close again. Mark started teasing Daniel about being the responsible one, saying he never broke the rules, never took chances. "Even in college, you were like an old man," Mark joked. I jumped in saying, "Oh, he still is." They laughed. It was fine. Until it wasn't. I poured another glass of wine and leaned back in my chair, feeling a little bold. Tessa laughed about how her boyfriend never remembered her birthday, and I said, "At least Daniel remembers that stuff, but only because his best friend reminds him." Mark laughed awkwardly. Daniel glanced at me but didn't say anything. The silence stretched just long enough to make me want to fill it. So I said it, the line that would burn everything down. I smirked, raised my glass, and said, "Well, your best friend knows what I like." It came out faster than I meant it to, sharper too. For a second, I thought maybe they'd laugh, but no one did. The air went still. Mark's face went blank, Tessa's mouth half open. Daniel froze completely. His hand stopped mid-motion with the serving spoon, and he just looked at me, not angry, not even confused, just still, like something inside him had gone quiet. I tried to fix it immediately. I said, "Relax, it's a joke," but even my own voice sounded nervous. Tessa forced a laugh that didn't sound real. Mark muttered something about needing more wine and stood up to refill his glass. Daniel didn't move. The rest of dinner dragged like a punishment. No one really spoke. Daniel ate quietly, nodded when someone asked him something, and avoided my eyes completely. I told stories to fill the silence, pretending everything was normal. But every word I said only made the air heavier. After they left, I followed Daniel into the kitchen. He was loading the dishwasher slowly, methodically. I said, "You're not seriously mad about that, right?" He didn't answer. I tried again. "It was just a joke. You're being ridiculous." He closed the dishwasher and stood there for a long moment before saying, "Do you even hear yourself sometimes?" His voice wasn't loud, just tired. I crossed my arms, defensive. "Oh, come on. Everyone knew it was a joke. You're acting like I said something awful." He looked at me then, and I'll never forget his expression. It wasn't hurt. It was disappointment, deep and cold. He said, "You embarrassed me in front of my best friend." I rolled my eyes, said he was overreacting. He didn't respond. He just walked upstairs, grabbed a pillow and blanket, and headed to the guest room. The sound of that door closing hit harder than any argument. I stood there in the kitchen, half expecting him to come back down and yell. I almost wanted him to. I wanted to fight, because fighting meant he still cared, but he didn't come back. I poured myself another glass of wine, telling myself he'd cool off by morning. He always did. He wasn't the type to hold grudges. I went to bed alone that night, angry at him for making me feel guilty. When I woke up, his side of the bed was untouched. He'd already left for work. The guest room door was still closed. I stood there staring at it, realizing for the first time that silence can be louder than shouting. I sent him a message. "Hey, can we talk tonight?" He didn't reply. At work, I told Tessa that Daniel was being dramatic. She said I was right, that men can't take jokes. I laughed, trying to agree. But deep down, I felt a knot in my chest I couldn't untie. That night, when Daniel came home, he didn't bring up dinner. He ate quietly, cleaned up, and said goodnight. He didn't come to bed. The guest room light stayed on long after mine went out. And that's when I started to feel it. The slow, heavy dread that something in him had shifted. Not just anger, not just hurt. Something final. Something I couldn't joke my way out of. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and hummed like I always did when I wanted to seem unbothered. Daniel sat at the table reading something on his phone. I asked if he wanted toast, and he said, "I'm fine." Just that. Not cold, not kind, just distant. I told myself he was still sulking, that he'd eventually laugh about the whole thing. He always forgave me. That was his problem. Too forgiving. At work, I told Tessa about his silent treatment. She rolled her eyes and said, "He's just being sensitive. Guys like him hate feeling teased." I nodded, pretending I agreed completely, but her words didn't make me feel better. They made me uneasy. When I came home that night, Daniel was sitting in the living room typing on his laptop. The house felt too quiet. I sat across from him trying to sound light. "Are we really still doing this?" He looked up, met my eyes for a second, then said, "Doing what?" I laughed, but it came out shaky. "This weird act like I committed a crime." He closed his laptop and said, "I'm not acting, Elara." The way he said my name, steady, calm, made my stomach twist. I told him I didn't mean it, that it was a joke, that he should stop making it bigger than it was. He didn't argue. He just said, "You don't realize what you sound like anymore." Then he stood up and went upstairs. That night, he slept in the guest room again. I could hear him moving around through the wall, opening drawers, shutting them softly. It felt like he was packing, though I couldn't tell what. I almost knocked on the door, but I didn't. I told myself if I left him alone, he'd come back on his own. By the third day, the silence started to change shape. It wasn't just distance anymore, it was planning. He wasn't withdrawn, he was focused. He cooked, cleaned, went to work on time, but everything he did had that same controlled energy, like he was checking boxes. I tried to joke about it one night, saying, "You're acting like a robot." He said, "Maybe robots don't get humiliated." I froze. I wanted to snap back, but something about his tone stopped me. The next evening, his sister Nora stopped by. She hugged me, but it felt forced. We sat at the table, and she asked if everything was okay. I told her yes, that Daniel was just stressed. She said, "He doesn't look stressed. He looks done." I frowned, asked what that meant. She didn't answer, just said, "He doesn't talk about you anymore." When Daniel came home, Nora stayed quiet. He greeted her warmly, kissed her cheek, and asked about their parents. I expected him to include me in the conversation like he used to, but he didn't. I was invisible, sitting right there. After she left, I asked what that was about. He said, "What?" I said, "You ignored me all dinner." He said, "I had nothing to say." I told him he was acting like a stranger. He said quietly, "Maybe that's what you wanted." I snapped then, accusing him of punishing me, of being dramatic, of caring too much about what people thought. He just nodded slowly, like he'd already accepted that none of it mattered. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. When I went into his office later, his laptop was gone too. I opened the drawer where we kept our bills and saw a printed list labeled Joint Finances and Personal Assets. My name was highlighted beside certain items: bank accounts, mortgage payments, insurance. Notes written in his handwriting: to review, to separate, to confirm value. My throat went dry. I took a picture of the list with my phone, not even knowing why. Maybe part of me didn't believe it. Maybe I wanted proof that this was really happening. That night, I tried to act sweet. I cooked his favorite dinner, lit candles, tried to start small talk about the weekend. He said thank you, ate in silence, and cleaned his plate. I followed him when he stood up. "Can we just talk?" I asked. He stopped, looked at me and said, "About what? You already said it all." Then he turned and went to the guest room again. I sat at the table long after he closed the door, staring at the empty plates. I told myself he was bluffing, that he'd never really leave. Daniel wasn't that kind of man. He was dependable, predictable, loyal. The kind of man who stayed even when he shouldn't. But deep down, I could feel it. The quiet had changed. It wasn't hurt anymore. It was strategy. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was the one holding the power anymore, or if he'd already taken it back without saying a word. By the end of that week, I started pretending everything was fine in public. I smiled more, wore brighter clothes, talked louder. It was easier than explaining that my husband barely spoke to me. At work, I told everyone Daniel was just tired from grading papers. I even joked that marriage had turned him into an old man. They laughed, and I laughed with them, even though the sound made me sick. When Tessa asked if things were better, I said, "We're fine. He just needs to loosen up." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "You really shouldn't feel guilty for one stupid joke," she said. "If he can't take humor, that's on him." I wanted to believe her. I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my fault. That Friday, Evelyn, Daniel's mother, invited us to dinner for her birthday. I tried to get out of it, but Daniel said he was going. His tone made it clear I was expected to come too. He even drove us there, quiet the whole ride. I talked most of the way, trying to fill the silence. He didn't interrupt, didn't react, just nodded occasionally, like a man enduring noise he couldn't wait to escape. At the table, everyone was cheerful. Evelyn thanked Daniel for helping her with some paperwork. Nora smiled at him, proud. No one asked me anything. When I tried to make conversation, Evelyn gave polite, short replies. I could feel their distance pressing in on me. When I excused myself to the bathroom, I caught a bit of their conversation through the hall. Evelyn said softly, "She doesn't realize what she's lost yet." Nora replied, "She will." I froze behind the door. When I came back, I pretended I hadn't heard a thing. Daniel looked at me once, but didn't say a word. On the way home, I finally snapped. "Are you telling your family things about us?" He said, "They can see things for themselves." I demanded to know what that meant. He said, "They see the way you talk to me." His voice was still calm, which somehow hurt more than yelling ever could. That night, I called Tessa again, ranting about how unfair it all was. She told me to relax, that Daniel would come around. "Just remind him who he married," she said with a laugh. "Men like that need to be reminded you're the fun one." I clung to her words like a lifeline. The next day, I decided to take her advice. I dressed up, did my makeup, made lunch, and waited for Daniel to come home. When he walked through the door, I greeted him with a bright smile. "Surprise," I said, pulling him toward the table. He looked tired, cautious. I poured him wine, told a few stories about work, tried to make him laugh. He listened quietly, no smile, no response. Finally, I said, "You're not really going to keep this up forever, are you?" He tilted his head. "Keep what up?" I said, "This act. Like I did something unforgivable. You're being cold for no reason." He said, "There was a reason. You just don't want to face it." I rolled my eyes. "It was a joke, Daniel. People say worse things every day." He said, "I know." His calm made me angry. I slammed my glass down. "So what? You're punishing me for making you look bad?" He looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes. "No," he said quietly. "I'm showing you who you made me into." I didn't know what to say. He stood up, gathered his plate, and began cleaning up. That was it. No yelling, no accusations. Just that quiet line that kept echoing in my head. The next morning, while he was at work, I snooped. I opened his desk drawer again and found his laptop bag. Inside was a folder labeled Consultation, Private. My stomach twisted. I opened it and found printouts, emails with a lawyer, notes about property division, lists of account numbers. My name was on some of them, underlined. I snapped the folder shut, my heart pounding. He wasn't just angry, he was planning something. I told myself it was an overreaction, that maybe he was bluffing to scare me. Daniel wasn't cruel, he wouldn't really go that far. But then I remembered the way he said, "I'm showing you who you made me into." That night, I confronted him. "I found your papers," I said. He didn't even look surprised. He just said, "Good, now you know." I demanded to know why he was doing this. He said, "Because I can't trust you to respect what's mine, not even my dignity." I called him dramatic again, accused him of trying to make me look bad. He said, "You already did that yourself." Then he went upstairs. I stood in the kitchen, shaking, staring at the folder in my hands. I wanted to tear it up, to burn it, to undo everything. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Daniel had already decided what came next. I could see it in his eyes now. He wasn't bluffing. He was leaving, not in anger, but in precision. And the worst part was, I'd given him every reason to. The next few days felt like living inside a storm I couldn't hear. Daniel barely spoke, barely looked at me, yet every movement of his felt deliberate. He'd wake early, shower, and leave for work before I even sat up. When he came home, he'd go straight to his office, close the door, and stay there until dinner. I told myself he was punishing me, that he was being cruel, that this was all about control. But deep down, I knew he wasn't trying to control me. He was letting go. On Wednesday, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I cornered him in the kitchen before work, blocking the door with my hand. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed, set down his coffee, and nodded. "Then talk." My throat went dry. I said, "I don't know what else you want from me." I said I was sorry. He shook his head slowly. "You said you were sorry for upsetting me, not for what you did." I frowned. "That's the same thing." He said, "No, it isn't." I laughed bitterly. "So what? You're going to divorce me over a joke?" His eyes didn't move. "It wasn't the joke," he said. "It was what it showed me." That line made me angry, though I didn't know why. I started throwing out excuses, words I didn't even believe, how I was just trying to be funny, how everyone knew I didn't mean it, how he was taking everything too seriously. He didn't argue. He just stood there, calm and quiet, letting me talk myself into exhaustion. When I finally stopped, he said, "You humiliated me in front of my best friend, and you laughed when you saw how it hurt." I started to deny it, but then I saw his face, steady, sad, certain, the kind of face that said he wasn't trying to win anymore. Later that day, I called Nora, desperate for someone to take my side. She listened quietly while I vented, then said, "Elara, I warned you. He doesn't forget when someone crosses a line." I told her she didn't understand, that I was just being playful. She sighed. Playful people don't break the people who love them. Then she hung up. That night, Daniel came home later than usual, carrying a thick envelope. He set it on the kitchen counter without saying a word. When I asked what it was, he said, "You'll see." Then he went upstairs. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were legal papers, separation of assets, property division, even instructions for mediation. I stared at the words, not understanding how he could be so calm about dismantling our life. I stormed into his office, waving the papers. "You're doing this behind my back?" He looked up from his laptop, unbothered. "I told you. I can't live with someone who treats me like a joke." I said, "You're making a mistake." He said, "I already made one." I tried to guilt him then, the way I always had when things went too far. I told him I was hurt, that he was cruel, that he was overreacting. I cried, threw my voice, told him I didn't deserve this. He watched me for a long time, then said, "You always turn everything into a performance, but this isn't a show anymore." The next morning, I found the guest room empty. His clothes were gone, the closet half bare. I called his phone, it went to voicemail. I drove to Nora's, and she opened the door with that same look of quiet pity. "He's staying here for now," she said. "He needs space." I said, "He can't just leave like that." She said, "He didn't. He told you exactly what he was doing. You just didn't listen." For the rest of that week, I tried everything: calls, texts, emails. He answered once, short and final. "Please handle all communication through my lawyer." When I told my mother, she was furious. At him, not me. "He's acting childish," she said. "You should fight for what's yours." She called it a bluff, but I knew it wasn't. Daniel didn't bluff. He planned, and when he planned, he followed through. By the weekend, I got an email from his lawyer confirming the first appointment for financial mediation. It felt surreal. My husband of 4 years, the man who never raised his voice, was now dismantling our marriage through signatures and deadlines. No drama, no shouting, just silence wrapped in paperwork. That night, I sat in the empty guest room where he used to sleep. The sheets still smelled like his cologne. I wanted to hate him for how calm he was, how methodical. But the truth was, he wasn't punishing me. He was protecting himself. And in some twisted way, I knew he'd been right to. Days passed, and the silence between us became something living. Even without Daniel in the house, I could feel him everywhere. In the way I hesitated before opening a drawer, in the empty side of the closet, in the untouched cup on the counter. Every morning I woke expecting him to walk through the door, to say he'd calm down. But instead, I got phone calls from lawyers and messages from mutual friends asking, quietly, if it was true. I stopped going to work for a few days. I told Tessa I was sick, but really, I couldn't stand the idea of people whispering about me. She came over one afternoon with a bottle of wine, trying to cheer me up. "You just need to talk to him face to face," she said. "Make him see that this is ridiculous." I nodded, though I already knew it wouldn't work. Daniel wasn't doing this out of anger. He was doing it because he'd already made peace with leaving. That weekend, I finally gathered the courage to go to Nora's house. She looked surprised when she opened the door. "He's not here," she said before I could ask. "He went to the city to meet with someone about work." I asked if he'd said anything about me. She shook her head. "He said he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. He just wants things settled." I followed her inside anyway, sat on the couch and tried to keep my voice steady. "I just want to explain myself," I said. "He's blowing everything out of proportion." Nora crossed her arms. "He's not blowing anything up. He's finally respecting himself." That word, respect, stung more than I expected. When I got home that evening, a courier was waiting at the door with another envelope. Inside was a financial statement, updated accounts, a list of what was now solely his, and a note from his lawyer about dividing the rest. At the bottom was a brief message in Daniel's handwriting. "Please remove your belongings by next week. I'll be transferring the lease to my name only." I sat on the couch, holding the paper, reading it over and over. It didn't even feel cruel. It felt careful, too careful. He'd made sure there was nothing left to argue about, no emotion, no opening for me to twist. The next day, Tessa convinced me to go out for lunch. I agreed, mostly because I couldn't stand being alone. We sat in a small cafe near the office, pretending things were normal. Halfway through, Mark walked in. He looked startled when he saw me. I hadn't spoken to him since that night. I waved awkwardly. He hesitated, then walked over. "Hey," he said. "How are you holding up?" I smiled like it didn't matter. "Fine." He nodded. "Daniel's doing okay. He's calmer." Something in his voice made me pause. "You've been talking to him?" I asked. He said yes, that Daniel had reached out to finalize some shared accounts they used for their joint investments. "He said he's just tying up loose ends," Mark added quietly. Then he looked at me, almost apologetic. He asked me not to get involved. After he left, Tessa leaned across the table. "You need to stop letting him control the story. People are going to think you're the villain." I laughed bitterly. Maybe I am. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing the house, picking up old framed photos and putting them down again. I thought about calling Daniel just to hear his voice, but I knew he wouldn't answer. Around midnight, I checked my email again. There was a new message from his lawyer. Final separation meeting confirmed for Friday. Mr. Wynn will not attend personally. My chest tightened. He wasn't even coming to see it through himself. I showed up at the lawyer's office anyway, desperate for some kind of closure. The lawyer was polite, almost gentle. He explained everything, the agreements, the documents, the signatures. When I asked where Daniel was, he said, "He wanted to give you space." I almost laughed. Space was all he'd given me for weeks. When the meeting ended, he handed me one last paper. He asked me to deliver this to you personally. It was a short letter, typed, signed at the bottom in Daniel's familiar handwriting. "Elara, I don't hate you. I just can't live in a place where love feels like mockery. Please take care of yourself." I read it twice, numb. No accusation, no bitterness, just quiet finality. I walked out of that office into the cold afternoon air, clutching the letter. For the first time, I understood what his silence had meant. It wasn't about anger, it was about control. Daniel hadn't needed to shout, to insult, or to get revenge. He'd just built a wall of calm around himself and left me outside of it. And as I stood there, realizing he'd truly meant every word, I knew the joke that started it all wasn't funny anymore. It had been a confession, and now it was all he remembered me by. A week later, I was back at my parents' house, sleeping in my old room like a teenager who'd been grounded. My mother pretended to be supportive, but I could tell she was embarrassed. "You'll bounce back," she said over breakfast, stirring her coffee like she was talking about a bad haircut. "Men do this all the time. You just gave him too much power." I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I knew I hadn't given him anything. He'd simply taken back what I never valued, his peace. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering how easily Daniel used to laugh. He had this quiet, low laugh that always made me feel safe. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard it. Now, I'd do anything just to hear it once more, even if it wasn't for me. Naomi, my sister, came by one evening with takeout. She sat at the edge of my bed, looking awkward. "So, how are you?" she asked. I shrugged. "I'm fine." She gave me a look that said she didn't believe a word. "He's really done, isn't he?" I asked after a while. She nodded. "He's not angry anymore. He's finished." The word hit harder than I expected. I told her I still didn't understand how he could just walk away without fighting for us. She said quietly, "He did fight, Elara. You just never noticed." I turned away, pretending to look for something on my nightstand. She let out a soft sigh. "You can't keep pretending this was just a misunderstanding. You hurt him." I snapped then, sharper than I meant to. "Everyone hurts someone. I didn't kill him." She stared at me for a long time, then said, "No, but you killed what he felt for you." After she left, I sat in silence, replaying every small moment I'd brushed off. The way he'd looked at me that night at dinner, the way his voice had gone quiet when he said, "You humiliated me." It all seemed so small at the time. Now, it was everything. A few days later, an email arrived from his lawyer. Again, it was short, formal, all settlements finalized, property transfer complete, no further correspondence required. I scrolled to the bottom and saw his digital signature. That was it. Legally, we were over. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, reading the message until the words lost meaning. Later that evening, I went to pack the last of my things from the apartment. Daniel wasn't there, of course. The place looked bigger without him in it. Clean, almost empty. The guest room, where he'd slept after that night, was spotless. The bed made, not a trace of him anywhere. On the kitchen counter, though, there was one thing he'd left behind: a small stack of photographs. Us, smiling, traveling, laughing. All those moments when I thought teasing him meant we were strong enough to handle anything. I picked up the top photo, me laughing, him looking at me with that soft expression I used to mistake for naivety. My throat tightened. I wanted to say I didn't mean it, that I was just being playful, that I loved him. But I'd had all the time in the world to say that, and instead, I'd made a joke. When I got back to my parents' house, my mother was watching TV. She muted it when she saw me. "Did you see him?" she asked. I shook my head. "He wasn't there." She studied my face for a moment, then said, "Maybe that's for the best." I didn't reply. That night, I sat by the window, scrolling through my old messages with Daniel. The last one he ever sent was months ago. "Pick up wine on your way home. Love you." I never replied because I'd been too busy texting Tessa about some party. Seeing it now made my stomach twist. Around midnight, I opened my email again and reread his final letter. "I don't hate you. I just can't live in a place where love feels like mockery." I used to think that line was self-righteous, maybe even manipulative. Now I understood it perfectly. He hadn't wanted revenge, he wanted peace. And I'd made his peace impossible. I closed my laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. For the first time, I didn't reach for my phone. There was no one left to message, no one left to argue with. I'd always thought losing love would feel dramatic. Tears, screaming, closure. But it didn't. It felt like silence. Like a door closing gently, the sound barely audible but impossible to ignore. And somewhere in that silence, I finally realized the cruelest part wasn't that he'd left. It was that he'd left without looking back. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.